Greetings and salutations. Welcome to this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Before we begin, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below and share this video with a friend. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. My guest today is a Los Angeles-based playwright who started his theater writing career in Orlando in the 90s when he co-founded the successful comedy troupe Them, writing for several ongoing shows including Serial Killers, The Box, We the People, Fast and Loose, and Crime Scene. His play, All the Best Killers Are Librarians, was nominated for Best Comedy at the 2016 Hollywood Fringe Festival, and his short play, Rocket Sex, was published in Volume 2 of the collective 10-play anthology. His play, Gifted, received its world premiere at Sacred Fools in January 2020 and at the LOFT in North Hollywood this past March. He also co-wrote the Audible Originals Catchers and Video Palace, the first original podcast from SHUDDER. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bob DeRosa.
Hey, James.
Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Glad we could do this.
Yeah.
So you got your start kind of doing sketch comedy.
Yeah. I was, for a while, I was always a filmmaker back in college. I went to University of Florida. I studied advertising so I could have a degree to make my mom happy. But I was just making films all the time, and I started writing features, bad features, just, getting my craft in order. And I graduated in the early 90s, and Orlando was supposed to be Hollywood East, is what they talked about, because Nickelodeon Studios had been built there, and they had a couple of big movies come through. So I went back there and started making short films with my friends, and just kind of fell into improv. SAC Comedy Lab is like their big improv theater there, family-friendly, short form, super popular. Wayne Brady got to start there. Jonathan Mangum, his co-host on Let's Make a Deal, got to start. There was an A team of main stage players there when I first started taking classes, and I ended up in their junior league, the next generation. And that was super fun. I learned a lot, and I ended up with 4 guys, and we just hit it off, and we kind of spun off and created our own troupe called Them. And we met doing improv, but we decided to start with sketch comedy. And we all went around in a circle the first meeting, and everybody was telling the story of how long they've wanted to do sketch comedy. And they're all like, I grew up with, Monty Python or Kids in the Hall. And when it came to me, I was like, I've been wanting to do sketch comedy ever since you guys asked me. Because it never even, I watched all that stuff, but it didn't even occur to me that I would something I would want to do or be good at. And so I started a journey with these guys, and we did an annual show every year at the Fringe that was really popular. We started building a following, and then we piled into a van and drove up to Canada and did the Canadian Fringe circuit in summer '98 and changed my life. It was like the best summer. We were like theater rock stars, and we just had a blast and met a lot of iconic Canadian improvisers, and came back to Orlando, and we learned long form up there, which nobody in Orlando was doing. So we came back and did all these crazy sci-fi long form shows. And we built up a huge following, did a weekly show. And around the same time, I just started getting invited to write 10-minute plays for some different play festivals, different shows in Orlando. And that was, I think, my sweet spot. I was okay at sketch comedy. It was a great troupe. I was not the funniest guy in that troupe, but I had strengths. But writing 10-minute plays was kind of the sweet spot, because I could be funny and create good characters, but then I had time to hopefully break your heart at the end, which I think is one of my superpowers.
Nice. Feel free to go ahead and that microphone moves, so go ahead and get comfortable so you don't have to feel like you have to lean into it. No worries about that.
Okay.
So the one question I have is I want to unpack so much, because you gave so much great information. So the first question I have is that you said that you learned a lot. And I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you if you can remember any of those things that you learned going through that process of writing sketch comedy, and how it's helped you get to where you are now, as even from a short playwright, not in stature, mind you, but in the length of how you write, and then how that's also helped your long form playwriting. Yeah,
for sure. Because it's so funny. I never think of myself as a playwright. And I've written hundreds of pages of produced material on 2 coasts. And mainly it's because, I've always done films and always thought of myself as a screenwriter, but also I have no traditional theater training at all. I didn't go to college. I think I've taken one playwriting workshop in my life in Orlando. And so it's all self-taught. It's all me and my friends learning how to do it in front of an audience, sometimes live, failing spectacularly. And so as far as like things that I learned, like especially with that group of guys, because they're still my best friends. And it was a group of 5 of us, and we ended up with a 6th guy who played guitar. And he would do live scoring for all of our shows. And like you see 1,000 improv troupes with a pianist. We were the one troupe with a guitarist who could also do like weird space effects on his guitar and stuff. And so working with those guys, improv teaches you to not take your ideas too seriously. It's like ideas are not precious. They're a dime a dozen. I think when you get into screenwriting, people are like really holding on to their ideas with their nails. I'm making this thing. Okay. I'm making this thing they're holding on to their ideas. Like, my idea is precious. Don't touch my idea. My idea is perfect. Don't mess with it. And when you do improv, you have to have an idea every second. You throw it away, and if the audience doesn't dig it, cool, you're on to the next one. Or if you throw it in there and the guy adds something on top of it and it changes, cool, that's fine. So improv taught me to not be precious about my ideas. And so then I was naturally drawn, when it came to playwriting, because of that, I was naturally drawn to stuff where I would have to write very quickly. And that's a lot of so like doing sketch comedy with those guys, we'd crank out a show, and like you'd throw out an idea and they would like live or die in the room. And then you're writing it and you're putting it in front of an audience, and you just learn really quickly, that was a good one or that was a stinker. And then you move on. So like when I started doing those 10-minute plays, all of a sudden I'm like, okay, I write this, and then a week later it's on stage. And so when I came out to LA, I referred to the theater. I ended up at Sacred Fools, and that was I was a member there for like the last probably 8 or 9 years until they've had to dissolve the membership of the company. It's a long, dramatic story, but the company's wonderful, and I've had so many incredible experiences there and made so many friends. But I was naturally drawn to the theater where I could write very quickly, where I would write a show overnight, and the next night, it's going up. We'd have what we called Fast and Loose, which I did those back in Orlando, and they're essentially playing a day. And so by having to write quickly, it just teaches you to be sharp, to throw your ideas away, but also your instincts get kind of razor sharp. And when you have to write a play overnight and it's going to be performed by people on stage in front of an audience the next day, you learn pretty quickly to trust your instincts, and B, I have to give them something good. I can't give them something crappy that feels like it was written in 5 hours, even though it has been written in 5 hours. And to me, I'm like, I love writing theater because it's about collaboration. It's about working with directors and amazing actors and the whole team that puts it together. And I just want to give them something good. And so that early time in Orlando was about learning how to just work quickly and give people something good, from the other actors all the way to the audience. Just give them something entertaining as fast as you can.
How do you write quickly? Have you been doing it so long that you know how to stick with structure? You know where things go. I'm fascinated by it because it seems so difficult, but yet simple, I guess.
A couple different things. First of all, as far as structure is one. The thing is, I've been writing. I'm sorry. I'm going to think for a sec. I've been writing professionally for 20 years. And I had a good, 8 to 10 years of working on my craft before I was a professional. And I'm a big believer in you learn all the rules. I read every, structure book I could get my hands on. I read theater structure books. I read, screenwriting structure. I wrote narrative, whatever. Learn all that stuff. Then when you do improv, if you're at a good improv school, they're teaching you dramatic structure within a scene. It's not just like waka waka, be funny on stage. It's about, they teach you structure. They teach you what's a good scene. Put somebody up a tree, throw rocks at them, and then get them out of the tree. That kind of stuff. And the thing is like you're constantly putting that stuff into your brain over years, and you're practicing, and you practice all the time. You watch a movie and you go, I know what's happening because we're 25 minutes in and we're about to go into the second act. And it just becomes sort of unconscious. So I'm at the point now, if somebody walked in right now and go, oh, hey, James, Bob, you guys need to write a 1-act play about a fish. it may not be great, but I could write it really fast because structure is just kind of in me now. It just becomes sort of this habit that you forget about. And you still have to think about it because all the time I'll write something and I go, why is this sucking? Oh, because my structure's messed up, because my inciting incident's happening too late, or it's not happening at all, and I'm starting to, whatever happens. There's still stuff where I have to catch myself and go, oh, go back to the basics, dummy. But when you're writing really quickly and when you're doing improv, that structure has to be in your bones. And then on top of that, like dialogue, which is a lot of what you do in a 10-minute play, you're just cranking through dialogue. Improv teaches you how to write first draft dialogue that's really good because you're doing it in front of an audience. And I used to think of it that way. Like I'm saying something to an audience because my troupe and I, we were the only guys in Orlando doing these kinds of shows. They talked about us like we were these weird sci-fi wizards because we did all this. And this is before, the Star Wars, Renaissance, and before the Marvel movies. Like we were doing these, we did an entire run of like sci-fi long form improvised movies with scores and everything. And there's plot. There's like hardcore plot and twists and surprises. And like whenever I say something to an audience or to one of my, compatriots on stage, that's first draft dialogue. So it better be good. So then when it comes time to writing a play, and I'm going to be writing something quickly, hopefully I'm writing dialogue that an actor can say. I read a lot of plays written by good people that are just, sometimes it's just hard to get your mouth around it. And having been the guy having to say the words, I got pretty good at knowing, is an actor going to be able to say this, or are they going to stumble on these words? So, digging into the craft of it, that's, I think, a lot of what by doing sketch and improv before I did traditional theater writing, that's a lot of what it taught me.
You mentioned that the dialogue isn't easy to say. How do you write dialogue that's easier? What makes bad dialogue in that regard when you say that?
It's a taste thing for sure, but I think it's dialogue that feels like dialogue as opposed to something somebody would actually say. And so I talk to myself when I write. My wife makes fun of me because I say the words as I'm typing them because I'm practicing. I'm like, is this going to be able to say? Am I going to be able to wrap my mouth around it? No, that was a terrible thing to say. Am I going to be able Yeah, okay, I'm going to rewrite that line. Am I just going to be able to say this in a way that's elegant and easy to remember? And I don't always get it right. I fail often, but I practice and I say the stuff out loud. And a lot of writers, I even hear like novelists who sit down and every draft they read it out loud to themselves just to make sure that it's going to be elegant and simple and easy to say and still like artful, but also realistic and something that you can actually imagine somebody saying.
A little bit ago, you said you need to go back to the basics.
Mm-hmm.
What are the basics?
I think the basics are what makes a good story, and it's like I see you have Save the Cat on the bookshelf behind you, and I knew Blake. I'm a big fan, and he gets a lot of flack. Blake Snyder wrote that book. And he's passed away now, yeah. But he gets a lot of flack for the dumbing down of Hollywood. I'm like, no, he didn't do that. Hollywood did it all by itself.
I agree with that.
But, he talked about stories being transformation machines. And I think it's a wonderful way to think of it. If like somebody is not transforming into something else by the end of the story, then why is the story being told? So I think it's just that remembering that somebody needs to come into a story and leave it differently. They don't have to be a better person. They can be a worse person. But somebody's changing or learning or failing to learn or something. And like, in a 10-minute play, it's great because it can be one scene, somebody walks in and they have an inch of growth in their life. They've learned one tiny little lesson or gotten one step closer to who they should be. But whether it's a 2-hour play or a 10-minute play, we still come because we want to believe that people can change, hopefully for the better. So I think that's always the core of the basics of like, is a person changing? And then how does a person change, and how do you see that? How do you structure that in a story, whether it's a 10-minute story or, you know, a 2-hour story. You know, even a 10-minute story, if a person walks in and they change after 2 minutes, I'm like, your story's over, man. So that to me is the basics of like going, you know, how do we keep the audience's interest for the proper length of the piece? Like I used to program for a film festival, great festival back in Orlando, you know, the Florida Film Festival, which is, you know, they've been going close to 30 years. And almost every film submitted to us was too long. So I saw 5-minute films that should be 3. I saw 2-hour films that should be 90 minutes. And I'm a believer that usually comes from the basics of like, do you have enough story to kind of tell the story you're trying to tell, and not a second more or a second too little. And I think that to me gets back to the basics of just structuring the story you want to tell.
Do you think that conflict within that character is that character trying to prevent that change? I've never thought of it that way. It's just kind of what, as you were describing it, I'm wondering if that's really what is at the core of conflict within the characters. Like that change is they're trying to get that change to happen.
Yeah.
Within that world, but the conflict is that character is trying to prevent the world from changing and staying at that safe place.
Yeah, because if you think of nobody wants to change. Everybody likes to stay where they're at. So like, there's a lot of strife in the world always, but there's a lot of particular strife right now because there's a feeling of advancement, you know, in the world socially and philosophically. And some people are like, cool, let's evolve. Let's evolve the species of what it means to be human. And there's a lot of people that are like, do not do that. I would like things to be the way they were when I was growing up in wherever I am from. So people resist change, and I think people naturally resist change. And so, and I'm a big believer, like, you know, stuff like the Christmas Carol. Like, we want evil rich people to be visited by 3 ghosts and wake up a changed person and wake up a better person. And that, we know that probably doesn't really happen in the real world, but we want it to. So yeah, we want to see people afraid to change because we can relate to that, but then we want to see them forced to overcome that and dig deep into themselves and become the better version of themselves, because that's what we want for ourselves, but we can't always do it. So that's what we get from stories. That's what we get from, whether it's plays or movies or books or whatever. That's what we get. That's why that conflict is so important, because if you read something where somebody's not changing and there's no conflict, it's boring. You know?
You going back a little bit to the fast writing. When you do that, are you editing as you go, or do you just bust that first draft out and then tweak and fix?
I like trying to bust out that first draft and then go back and tweak it. I like the momentum of writing fast. I can't always do it, especially in screenwriting, but with stuff that's really dialogue driven, I'd love to be able to get that feeling where my fingers can't type fast enough. That's the zone I'm always searching for. I think every writer is searching for that, and you just doesn't come along every day, which is why I like exercises that force you to do it, like doing the show Fast and Loose as Sacred Fools. I would get 2 variables and a number of cast and say, see you at 8 a.m, you better have a 10-page play. I love those exercises because it forces me to do it. And so I crank it out as quickly as I can, usually in a few hours. And then I go back and I spend another couple hours tweaking and revising. And so even though it's only a few hours to actually write that 10-minute play, it's been through multiple revisions. I've said every line multiple times. You know, sometimes I'll go back and I'll read a revision and go, oh, no, I should add that line back in that I just cut. You know, but you can get really micromanagey, even something that it's not like, oh my gosh, it leaves my fingers and I just have to hand it in because that's all I've got. Even in a night, you can really revise, and you can do the work. You can do the craft, even in a short amount of time like that. You said
have 2 variables and then better have a play. What's an example of 2 variables that's in that exercise that you would assign? Or
so, like, the one play that I've written that has been published is a 10-minute 1-act called Rocket Sex, and it was actually created as a part of Fast and Loose. So my one published play I wrote in about 5 hours, and my variables, I can't remember. They're usually thematically linked categories, but my variables were deep space exploration and porno theater. And I got a cast of 2, which I picked a man and a woman. And when I say picked, I mean you're literally picking, pieces of paper out of a hat. So I had a cast of 2, a man and a woman, porno theater and deep space, and it was like, go. And 2-person plays are really hard because usually it's that third person who comes in that brings the conflict. So like, geez. But and that was an amazing night. I remember it very clearly because it's one of my favorite 10-minute plays. It's, like I said, it's the one that got published. I submitted it to a play festival, a group called The Collective in New York, and they would do an annual one-act festival, and they had like 1,200 submissions, and they picked 12, and mine was one of them. And it was my good friend Carrie recommended, and another friend. I had a friend here, Carrie, who recommended that I submit to that festival, and then a friend, Ashley, back in Orlando, recommended the same festival, and so it's just one of those meant to be sort of things. But yeah, it was. I had an evening, and I had 2 totally different ideas. I had this weird idea about a meet cute in a porno theater between a really shy guy and a really shy girl. And then I was like, well, I also want to do this story about a girl who's having to like sleep, because she's a rocket scientist, and they put her to sleep for 10 years while she's flying out to some deep space exploration, mining situation. And I couldn't decide which idea I wanted to do, so I ended up smashing them together. And that's what the story is. It's a rocket scientist is about to leave Earth for 10 years, and she just wants to have sex one last time. And she doesn't really ever have sex because she's too shy. So she goes to a porno theater and meets the right guy. So I know it's ridiculous, but it has this wonderful surprise ending, and I'll never forget it because it was the New Year's Eve show. They used to do Fast and Loose on New Year's Eve, so the show would wrap around 10, so you'd have a chance to party afterwards. And they put mine last, and I was like, which is usually like that's the heavy hitter slot, so it's usually like the big cast and action or music or something. And like my 2-person little meet cute in a porno theater is gonna wrap up the whole night. Are you sure? I had the perfect actors and the perfect director, and I get to my little surprise ending, and it happens, and there's just like gasp that kind of goes across the audience, and I'm sitting in the back row, and I'm just like, it's one of the best moments in a theater I've ever had in my life, and that's. You don't just have that. You do that because you've done 50 of them, and 45 of them maybe weren't so great, and then a few of them are pretty good, and that one knocked it. That one worked. That one really worked.
So you went from sketch into screenwriting and television writing as well?
Yeah, TV writing as well. Yeah.
Whereas most people would go playwriting into maybe television and film. So what made you go into playwriting? Especially after having success.
Yeah. When I moved, because back in Orlando, I did everything. I was like, my troupe we did corporate gigs in addition to our weekly show. I was a film festival programmer. I was assistant casting director. I was a commercial actor. I was a jack of all trades in Orlando. And when I moved to LA to focus on my screenwriting, and I said, you know what? I'm going to focus on my screenwriting and do improv on the side with my troupe. That's it. I'm going to get lean and I'm going to get focused. And so then my troupe, we had a monthly show for about 2 years, and then eventually we went on hiatus and never stopped performing. And around the same time, I went and saw a late night show at Sacred Fools called Crime Scene. My roommate at the time, Katie, was in a show, and it was a really fun, structure for an evening. It was like 3 different stories, 3 scenes each, kind of staggered with every scene had a cliffhanger, and they were all genre and they were all funny. And she came up to me after the show, and I was complimenting her, and she's like, do you think you could write for this? And I was like, you know what? I think I could. And literally a producer materializes out of the shadows like a vampire. Paul Byrne's like, oh, you're a writer, are you? And I ended up writing like 9 shows for Crime Scene. And it was like kind of like right when my troupe stopped performing is when all of a sudden I had this opportunity to start just doing fun stuff at Sacred Fools. And so I worked, I wrote a bunch of stuff for Crime Scene. I did Fast and Loose, and then Crime Scene got canceled, but then they had another show called Serial Killers, which that's a juggernaut. It ran over 15 years, and that show was an incredible, and like every Saturday night, 11 o'clock, there was just this ridiculously fun show. And Serial Killers was like 5 shows in or 3 shows leave, the audience would vote and kill 2 ongoing serials. And then the next week, 2 brand new pilot, 10-minute plays would go up against them and try to earn a slot. And so it was an amazing exercise because the audience would tell you whether or not you did a good job by killing your show or not. And so even though I was like, my screenwriting career was starting to take off then, Sacred Fools was like my writer's gym. I'd go there to work out. And also it's like screenwriting takes forever to get anything made. I've been really lucky. I've my 3rd film is cameras are rolling right now. So thank you. It's really cool. I'd love to be able to say that because I had a long dry spell there for a while. But like you can I've written over 30 scripts and gotten 3 produced. It's like I've gotten, and the ones that have been produced, they take 2 to 4 to 6 years, depending on how things get. It's a long time, a lot of waiting. And by working in theater, I get to make stuff. I get to work with actors. I get to work with directors and producers. And I get to work on my craft. I get to practice, but I'm also making stuff that matters to me. So like, especially during this dry year, some of the best experiences I had was writing plays. And I think if you just write screenplays, you're writing for one audience. You're writing for a film audience, which is fine. And a lot of people do just that. But I've always been like, I just want to make stuff. I want to make stuff with my friends. I want to make cool stuff. I want to make an audience happy. Like, and with a movie, if you're lucky, a few million people see it. And if you write a Fast and Loose and you write a 10-minute play, maybe 50 people see it, or 100 if you're super lucky. But also, that is just as satisfying sometimes, even more so, depending on how it goes. But yeah, it's I've had this weird parallel career because the playwriting doesn't make me any money, but it really feeds my soul in a way that little else can.
Taking this self-taught route opposed to the academic route, what do you suggest for people that are interested in playwriting that may not be able to afford it, going to the school route, the college route, or even the workshop route, but really want to give it a go?
For me, it was about finding my community, and I think community is free, depending on how you do it, and community is everywhere. So like, I was in Orlando, not known as a theater town, but had an amazing theater scene. Especially like I was there during the late 90s, and it felt like, Seattle in the grunge years, or Athens during the REM years. Like it, and people may laugh when I say that because of course those are iconic places and iconic moments in time. But if you look at all the people, there's so many amazing artists that came out of the late 90s, early 2000s, Orlando theater / film scene. And it was a really special moment, and it was our community. And, it cost a little money to take some classes, but honestly, at the end of the day, it's finding your people. It's finding your family, the people you like to make stuff with, like-minded people that are smarter than you, people that, are coming behind you that eventually will look to you to help them. Finding that community, and it can be small. It can just be a handful of guys and girls that you like, and you go, let's put up a show. If you live, depending where you live, you can find a space and you can put up a show, and the audience, if they don't like it, you can learn from that and go, well, let's try again and make something better. So I'm just a big believer of not doing it by yourself, finding a community and kind of finding the people that you're going to come up with and you're going to learn with, and people that are going to challenge you to be better, not just people that think that everything you do is awesome, because I think that's a trap, and I think a lot of people fall into that. You want, like my troupe, I mean, we loved each other, but we were tough on each other. Like, even we were just doing sketch comedy in Orlando. Who gives a crap? We gave a crap. And I wrote a lot of sketches that I thought were hilarious that didn't pass muster and never made it to the stage because guys just didn't think it was funny enough. And I'm like, okay. And I learned from that. My stuff got better.
Do you think that there's something to be said about that small tier market? You're saying Orlando's not known as a theater town, but there's a lot of good theater going on. I think that can almost be said for almost any town And I think that there's something to be said for sticking it out and really making a name for yourself there before packing it up and going to a larger market like LA or New York or Chicago. You know, not to say that you can't learn something there, but I think that do you think it's better to fall flat and learn from those mistakes in I'll call it a safer environment, opposed to like going and falling on your face in a larger market?
I mean, that's what I did. Like I've always said, because I've always said that I paid my dues in Orlando. And what I meant by that is like I wrote a dozen screenplays in Orlando. And by the time I left, I was in a super popular troupe. You know, we had a following. We were making really good content. We wasn't even call it content back then. We were just putting on good shows. We had a following. I was writing screenplays. I had gotten a screenplay option by a local producer, but he got like legitimate, movie stars attached. It never got made, but there was momentum in my career. I was starting to write scripts that when people in LA read them, they're like, oh, this is pretty good. So like I wrote those 8 to 10 bad scripts in Orlando when my rent was cheap and I could work, I could wait tables. And then eventually I was able to quit waiting tables and just do shows and do all these, weird, casting jobs and, stuff like I can make a living and still work on my stuff in a safer environment surrounded by my friends. And I think the danger of that is maybe you stay there too long, you get too comfortable with that, or you leave too soon and you're not quite ready. I was lucky. I left at exactly the right time. I sold my first pitch to a movie studio a little bit after a year after I moved to LA, which that's fast.
Sure. And I would say that I think acting, being an actor is kind of a young person's game. You're within a timeline in that regard. Mm-hmm. But I think with screenwriting or even playwriting, if you're going to go to a larger market in that regard, you have some time to figure things out a little bit. So without giving anything away, how old were you when you came to LA to make a start?
I must have been like 30. I was early 30s.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you put some good time in without trying to rush it.
Yeah, I spent 10 years after, because I graduated college, right, like 4 years straight. So like I spent 10 years in Orlando working on my craft. And I didn't know that that's what I was doing. I thought I was going to be like an independent filmmaker living in Orlando. And I was going to do, little Coen Brothers type movies and just Quentin Tarantino movies and do that kind of, I thought that was going to be my path. And I'm friends with all the guys who made Blair Witch Project, and that was the hometown heroes who made the thing that that totally blew up. So I saw it happen, and they still got all this insane pressure to get the hell out of Orlando and come to LA and make stuff. So yeah, I didn't, but I did. I put in my time and I worked really hard. And the thing is like, one of the places where I was writing plays for, I took classes at a school called Artsake, and it was run by Yvonne Suhor, who was a TV actress in LA, and then she moved to Orlando, and she was like the only person in town kind of teaching a good film acting program. And she's since passed away, and she was a mentor to many of us. And she started a one act evening called Play de Luna. That's where I did some of my first 10-minute plays. But her whole job was to train her students to leave, to like quit the school and move to LA. And it always broke her heart when we left, but also she was training us to be professional and to work in our craft and to care and to come out here and kick ass. And a lot of people have. And she'd have these kind of, I picture them, they're always guys in my head. She always had these guys who were like, I'm going to work hard when I get to LA. And she's like, if you slack in Orlando, you're going to slack in LA. If you kick ass in Orlando, you'll kick ass in LA. And I believed it. I heard that and I was like, yeah, that's me. I'm busting my ass. I'm doing so much cool stuff in Orlando and I'm working really hard. And it was great to know that I could take that work ethic and that experience and come with it to LA. And the thing is you show up in LA and it doesn't matter. Those 10 years don't really matter to anybody. I say a producer materialized at Sacred Fools and said, you're a writer. But I wrote my first show for them, and they put on guardrails. They were like, we don't know, man. We don't know who you are. You say you can write, but we'll see. Then they saw my first show, and they're like, oh, cool, you're in. Like, I passed muster, and they started lowering the guardrails and gave me a lot more freedom. But being able to have those experiences in my hometown with my friends, with some safety nets, I'm a big believer in that. You know, as long as it's like if you're in a small pond, you have to grow. You have to outgrow your pond. I think that the problem sometimes maybe people get in that safe environment and they just coast and they don't feel the need to grow. They just kind of need to, and that can be fine too. I've learned, I've changed my thinking about that. I'm like, not everybody has to move to LA and become a movie star. Sometimes you can just make cool art in your smaller market, and that's fine.
Since you worked backwards going screenwriting into playwriting, do you find that are there any aspects of playwriting that has in turn helped your screenwriting?
Yes, in the sense, I think because, playwriting is much deeper, and it's much more about deeper character work. And we'll talk. I think we'll talk about my new play. My most recent play, Gifted, soon. But that's an example of that started as a screenplay, and people loved it. But the play is so much deeper and so much more emotionally connected, and really takes the audience on a journey emotionally in a way that the screenplay didn't. Part of it's just I'm a better writer 20 years later, but other parts of it is just that's one of the benefits of writing for the stage is all you've got is your actors and some tech. So you got to give them some real heart. You got to give them some place to go. And then by doing that on a regular basis, then it comes back to my screenwriting. I think it feeds all of it. I've worked in movies, TV, audio. I'm writing fiction now. And I think all of that feeds itself. I think playwriting in particular, it also, honestly, I think the ability to work with actors in that sort of way where like you're viscerally on stage and then they're in front of an audience, like that teaches you a lot too, that I think I took to screenwriting, and now I'm taking in audio fiction. Like so much of what we do in our audio shows is informed by our experience, doing theater for sure.
Sure. Probably not too far from radio plays as well, the old, and which has come up in past episodes as well, but we'll get into that. But since you already brought up Gifted, let's we don't usually talk about specific pieces, but let's go ahead and get to that, because I did get to see it, and it was very heartwarming, heartbreaking at the same time, but it was so simple, and so I'm curious. Like let's go and let's talk about what it's about rather than just talking about it without giving any insight to what this play is.
Yeah. It's I've always said it's a romantic dramedy with a magical twist. It's about a young woman named Ashlyn, and she can see the romantic fates of any couple that she sees, but she just can't tell it for herself. And in this story, we're sort of doing a flashback to where she comes back to her hometown, because she's everywhere she goes, she accidentally breaks somebody's heart with her gift. And so she's very much alone. So she comes back to her hometown, to her best friend, kind of her only family at this point. And she falls into this group of similarly gifted people. And she starts to finally kind of build a community and a family. And of course, her gift turns things sideways in a really shocking and heartbreaking way. And then we have to ask the question, is she going to keep running, or is she finally going to stay and make this her family? And that's what this story is.
How did you come up with the other gifts? Because it was very clever that that everybody's got this one gift that's really kind of silly.
Yeah. Before I was doing improv, back when I was post-college, I was a miserable server working at a restaurant. I was good at it. Like I worked at this one place for years. And it was a family seafood restaurant. I could walk up to the table, and when anytime anybody ordered a salad, almost every time I knew the dressing that they wanted before they told me. And I would even write it down on my little slip of paper. I'd write down Thousand Island. And then And then almost never did I have to erase it and change it into something else. And that's not because that's my gift. It's because I just got a good instinct for that sort of thing. But it occurred to me back then, I'm like, what if that was my superpower? Knowing what salad dressing people wanted on their salad. That would be stupid. And so that was stuck in my head. And then I went to a screenwriting panel at Sundance when I was there scouting films for our festival. And I saw this amazing screenwriting panel, and it really inspired me. Jon Favreau was on it, all these great writers. And I went and sat in the lounge next door, and I just had this vision of my friend Mandy, who was an actress I worked with in Orlando. It's a good friend of mine still, my wife's best friend, and they went to college together. And so I just imagined Mandy, who was like, post-punk, nose ring, dyed hair, smoking a cigarette. And I'm like, what's up with this girl? And I wrote the opening scene of the story where, a guy cons her because he has the gift to be able to know the flip of a coin, a million flips in a row, or however many. And like that dialogue I wrote sitting in that lounge 20 years later are still the opening lines of the play. So like that scene that you saw that opened the play, I wrote that 20 years ago. Like there's a lot of the play that's new, but that was, that's still there. So to answer your question, sorry, it took me a while to get back to it, is like, well, I smashed those ideas together. I'm like, here's a really painful, interesting gift that she has, and she falls in with this group. And I was the table waiting, I can know what you want before you order it character. And so that ended up becoming a gift in the script and now the play. And then after that, it was really just being creative and going, well, what would be interesting and what would be funny and what would be dumb? And then, one of the gifts turns out to be really heartbreaking and shattering. And that came really late in the development of the play. But, I don't know where ideas like that come from. It's just, it's like improv. You just throw them out and you let the good ones, let the good ones live.
Well, the other one was like a guy could tell what color underwear somebody was wearing.
Yeah, because I wanted something dumb. And he even says it in the play. It's like, my gift is ridiculous. And everybody loves that line because the whole audience is going, it is ridiculous. But I'll tell you, James, I can't tell you the amount of time somebody watched that play and then they come up to me afterwards in a very low voice. They'll say, I have a gift. And they don't do it like to be creepy. They're just like, and it's always stuff like that. It's always like, back when there used to be, when we didn't have cell phones, it'd be like the phone would ring and I knew who it was every single time. And it was always these gifts that are like, that's actually a thing, but it's not going to save the world. You're not going to be able to fight crime with that, but you actually know that thing. So.
Well, first of all, before I ask that question, were there any gifts that you came up with where you just tossed it aside and said, no, that's just not going to work? Or
probably, I don't really remember. It used to be who's at the end of the ringing phone, and I had to change that because cell phones. Now we
got it.
Now we don't need to know. But that was actually in an early draft. It was actually in an early draft of the play, and it didn't live.
Sure.
It's occurring to me now. One of the gifts is a woman knows the fastest way to get someplace, and now everybody has Waze in their phone or whatever. And so her gift is going to be her gift is now no longer impressive to anybody. But I realize if this place keeps getting produced, and because there needs to be that gap between when we didn't have cell phones and when we did. 20 years from now, it's going to have to be played by a 60-year-old. So that's probably a gift. If the play is still happening, I'll have to write in a new gift. But
or you just said it in 2023.
That's true. It could also be a period piece.
The one thing that I noticed or not that I noticed, the one thing that you did in this play is that you had when she can see the relationships, it's done in a dance. How does that look on the page? Is it just they dance, or is it this dance is reflective of this theme or these movements? How does that, and then how does the music come into that? How, because you chose some very, very interesting pieces, and so are those the songs that are in the script, or is that what was chosen for each? Were they different in each production?
So this is one of the biggest evolutions of the show. So like, just to give a tiny bit of context, like this was the script that when I wrote it in Orlando, people read it in LA, and they were like, oh, okay, you're ready. So I came out, and the script always had fans. It got optioned, almost got made. Never quite happened. The producers would always say, whatever happened to Gifted? So that was a screenplay that changed my life 20 years ago. And then as a member of Sacred Fools, we had a new play development program. And I was like, my wife was actually the one who encouraged me. She's, Jen was like, you're a member of the company. You should you've been writing all these things. You should develop a play. And so I just gave them the script of Gifted. And I was like, I want to write this into a play. And they gave me notes, and I wrote it into and I wrote it. I wrote a draft that didn't work. But one of the things right off the bat that everybody's like, well, what happens visually with the gifts? Because in the script, she just saw it, and we believed her. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know. I was like, I feel like it needs to be some sort of dance or mime or some sort of visual representation of it. So I wrote just a couple lines for each one. So like, there's a the first one is she's going to leave him, and they're going to be surprised at how much he begs her to stay. And then I would write like a line or two, just kind of giving a vague sense of like what that sort of, not even what it looks like, more what it feels like. I'd be like, there's a spotlight on Ashley and a spotlight on the two characters, and they do a dance that represents this sort of feeling that ends this sort of way. And I'm purposely a little vague because I really wanted, it's not my strong suit. And I wanted to give directors that do the show a chance to kind of interpret it in a way that works for them. And so,
what's not your strong suit?
Dance and any sort of choreography. It might be my greatest weakness. Singing is, according to my wife. But it's true. It's true. I'm terrible. So like one of the curators of that new play development program was Rebecca Larson, and my conversations with her really helped me with the development of the play, and to the point where I'm like, it came time, I'd finally done the draft I was really happy with, and I was like, I wanted to submit it to the Fools, and I asked her if she would attach herself as director, and she's like, absolutely. So she submitted it with her as director, and they chose us, which totally surprised me. So like, and then what she did is she brought in a choreographer, Tavy Stutz, who is, I hope I'm pronouncing his last name right. Tavy's amazing. Tavy's like Russian ballet, Cirque du Soleil, like he's an incredible dancer and choreographer, and he came in and he choreographed all the movements. This is in the original. There were some
impressive movements in that play.
This is the original piece that was done at Sacred Fools.
Got it.
So,
that's right.
And they were shorter. They were much shorter than the performance that you saw. The dance pieces, they were more like, they were just very quick. They were, 10 or 15 seconds a piece, but they were very evocative, and they did what I said in the play, which was they gave you a sense of what the gift was and how she saw it and how I made her feel. So then that worked out great. And one of Tavy's gifts is he can work with actors and meet them where they are. So like even an actor with not a lot of dance ability, he could figure out a way to help them dance in a way that still did the job of communicating the emotion, even if they're not an incredible dancer. And he did work with some incredible dancers in that original cast as well. But then the show closed a week before the pandemic shut down every theater in town. And so, 3 years later, theater is finally back. Jen was a member of both Sacred Fools and LOFT Ensemble. And I'd actually submitted it to LOFT originally as well. But then the Fools chose it, and I had to tell LOFT, I'm sorry, I had to give Fools the right of first refusal. But, maybe in a few years we can do it. And so after the pandemic, when the theater opened again, was doing shows, Jen was a member there and doing really great work at that company. I love that company. And I've been a fan of them, and I have a lot of friends there. And Jen pitched Gifted to LOFT Ensemble with herself as a director, and they accepted it. And they wanted her to co-direct because it was her first big production. And one of the things, my wife told me a couple of things, like when we got, because I started it 20 years ago, so it's a very cis play, it's a very heterosexual play. My wife was like, I'm going to gay it up. And she's like, okay, I get it. And so we switched around some of the genders. We have a non-binary character, and we made it more representational of our world, which I think really helps the show. But then she's also like, I want the dances to be longer. I want them to be like, almost like, I can't remember the exact words, but she had a goal of making them more emotional and like bigger stories within the dance. Mm-hmm. And so she partnered with a co-director, Sarah, who already directed the show at LOFT. So she had somebody to kind of, have her back through the whole process. But Jen sat in her office listening to songs for months before they went into rehearsal. And so she picked all those songs and pitched them all to her co-director and to Bree Pavey, who's managing director, I think is that her title, at the company at LOFT, but also the producer of the show and also in the show. And then Bree ended up choreographing the movement with Tavy, who came back and also did the LOFT production. But Bree did a lot of the early choreography, and Tavy came in to like really help make things safe and add just some incredible stuff. But like so the music that was my wife chose all that, and it was a team effort, and it's so different from the original production, but that's why I love it. Like I have enough in the script to let a director, I have enough in the script that it could be done with zero dancing and just mime and just, actors like me who can't dance at all. Like it could be done that way. If some small company in some town wanted to do it that way, cool. But I'm so fortunate I've had 2 productions with like amazing dance that really elevates the story and really connects with people emotionally.
How does a play development workshop work? I mean, what's that process like? And is that for people that have experience, or is that a good place for somebody who has no experience to kind of jump in and give it a shot?
Well, I'm a big fan of workshopping anyways, which is any sort of situation where you are presenting your work to other writers and they are giving you feedback. So like whether it's a screenwriting group or fiction or plays, I think that's part of a process where you get better at your craft, especially if it's a good group of people, that are not working from a place of ego, that are just trying to trash your work, people that want you, they want to be tough. You want tough love, but you want people that want you to get better at what you do. So what the Fools did, and I ended up after Gifted, after I'd gone through that program with Gifted, I then became one of the curators of that program. So I joined and I worked with Rebecca and another guy, Nathan, and then so I got to be on the other side of the table. And the way that we did it at Sacred Fools was there were some people that would give us their first play, but also these were people that had been doing theater for a long time, so their first play was pretty good. Like it was a good first step. And then we also got plays from super experienced playwrights. Some, I think we may have done one with a guest of your show. I can't remember. But
no, I want to know.
Yeah, but for the basic process is it's usually like a 3-step process. Like you give, you give a for early draft of the play, and then these 3 curators give feedback and notes, and then you go away and you do rewrites. Then you come back and you do a reading, and we would do that. We'd put together a reading. We invite actors, and the Playwright could invite some friends if they wanted, people that they wanted to get feedback from. Then after that reading, we would moderate a talk back, and it was only the whole point of the talk back was how can we make this play better? What's good about it? What's not working? What are some possible avenues that could help the playwright make the play better? And we used a particular process. It's a variation on, I think, what's called the Lerman process, which is very specific. It's like you start with what's working. Then I think the audience can ask the playwright questions. Then the playwright can ask the audience questions. And then you end with kind of general feedback and suggestions. But you do that in a way so that somebody doesn't, raise their hand and start going, well, here's the 10 things I don't like about your show. You do it to kind of ease the writer into the process. But I think that sort of feedback is awesome for a writer at any stage. It's just when you're first starting out, it can be hard to get feedback, to get real notes on your work. So you kind of have to be ready for it, and it helps to fail a little bit in private before you start bringing your work and putting it in front of people and going, what do you think of this? Go ahead.
No, well, okay. Well, how do you recognize you're failing in private rather than, this is so good, and then?
Well, I think every writer is different, and I think every writer starts from a place of either I am terrible, how am I ever going to get better? Or I'm amazing, I can't wait till everybody realizes it. And depending on where you are in your journey, You're about to have a path in front of you, and they're both difficult paths. I think the harder path is I am amazing. I can't wait till the world understands me. That I think is a very difficult path because you kind of have to get broken. You kind of have to like break that. That writer has to have so much of life kick them in the teeth before they realize, you know what, maybe I'm not as good as I think I am. Right. Whereas if you come at it with some humility and some respect for the art and the craft and realize, oh, people have been doing this for thousands of years. I'm just getting started. I'm going to try and hopefully by trying and working with people, I'll get better at this.
How do you spring back from that, not rejection, but that criticism where it's just like, you think you have something, you know, you're not the best. You think you have something, you put it down, you put it out there, and then it's just like the criticism is just a little bit much, and you're just like, how do you spring back from not throwing in the towel and saying that I can't do this?
It gets easier with time. Like the first time is the worst time. And once you realize that it doesn't kill you, you can do it a second time. And then you're like, okay, that wasn't as bad as last time. It's practice. It's like learning. Honestly, it's like learning anything. Like you want to run a marathon. That first mile is going to be the worst mile of your life. You know, you want to learn martial arts. I've been doing martial arts for 14 years. A lot of parallels between doing martial arts and doing improv. There's a lot of, I fail on the mat. I fail doing martial arts all the time, and I've been doing it a long time. It's easier now though, because I've been doing it for 14 years. So and some people, I get it. Some people, they get that first batch of feedback and they never go back and they just stop. And I don't know. I hope that people at the very least are getting that feedback from people that have their best interests in heart and aren't trying to crush them. And there's those people out there that just can't wait to smash another artist's dreams. So hopefully, you know, I think it's okay early on to, like, if you're getting feedback from 3 friends, pick a ringer. Ask your mom. She's going to say good things. Like, get at least one person that's going to tell you what you want to hear. What you just don't want to do is have 3 people that tell you, because that's the other danger. Is some people are like, oh my gosh, my entire family thinks I'm the best writer around. Like, you just don't only want to get that kind of feedback.
Sure.
But, and the thing is, I think, yeah, and that's the one good thing about going to school is it forces you into that sort of situation often. But, yeah, if you can survive it once, then you know you can go back to the well and do it again, and then it just gets easier, but never easy. That's the thing. I've been doing this. I've written over 30 scripts, and I send out a script, and a friend of mine goes, "Nah, it's not working, man. It sucks. It never gets easier." I feel for everybody who has to go through it. It's just that's part of it. That's part of the process and the craft is learning how to take your losses and show up and next day and get back to work.
So if somebody says it's not working, do you try to fix it, or do you just shelve it and move on to the next project?
I mean, you always want to try and fix it if you can. To me, that it's not working is basically is code for whatever you wanted to accomplish with this piece, it's not coming through. And I think that's the one thing that young writers take the wrong way, is they hear that it's not working and they go, well, you didn't understand it. It's like, no. Here's the 5 things you didn't understand about the work. And whenever I hear a young writer, I just want to stop them and go, well, it's not that I didn't understand it. It's that you want this to mean A, right? Well, I read it and I felt B. You didn't want me to feel B, right? And they go, well, I didn't want you to feel B. I wanted you to feel A. I'm like, well, somewhere in there, what you wrote, it's not my failing as an audience member. All I can do is feel what I'm going to feel with what you've done. So it's trying to get people to understand that it can be fixed. Because if I go, well, I wanted to accomplish this, and they're like, well, you didn't quite do that. I didn't find this character endearing, for instance. Like you saw Gifted. Ashlyn's a tough character in the sense that she has a difficult gift, and it's heartbreaking. But Ashlyn needs to be a lovable character. We have to be with Ash the whole way. So she's funny, and she's got pain, but she doesn't wallow in it. She I have there has to be a balance in that character because she's our lead character. If I wrote a draft of Gifted and somebody read it and they're like, I kind of don't like Ash. I don't care what happens to her. Then I'm like, okay, I have failed you. But then I can fix that because I can say, well, when did I lose you? When did she do something that was, uninteresting? Or when did you stop having sympathy for her? I can ask questions it helps when you're experienced, but you can learn to ask the right kind of questions to get people to tell you, oh, here's when you lost me, or here's where I got confused, or here's where, that if you can ask those questions, then you can fix it. Things only go on the shelf if conceptually, like I wrote a script. I can't believe I did. This was during my dark years where I just didn't work a lot. I wrote a script that was a really cool idea and everybody I pitched it to liked it. And then the script just sucked. Nobody cared. And my main character really didn't do anything for like 75 pages. She had a job and it was a cool job. And there's like psychic kids and all this weird stuff happening, but she didn't make a choice that would transform her into a different person until page 75. And it was kind of impossible for me to look at that script and go, how do I fix this? Because it was so broken conceptually that I'm like, you know what? Oh, I'm just going to put it on the shelf. And that one never got finished. But that's okay. Taught me something.
I've noticed in your bios and experience that you do a lot of co-writing. How do you set ego aside when you're working with somebody, or find that balance with that other person? How is that collaboration? We've in the past episodes we've talked about collaboration in theater as a whole, working with the director and working with a designer and whatnot. But when it comes to working with another writer, how does that work?
It's different every time. I don't do a lot of co-writing. I've had like just moments in my career, like definitely, with my troupe, with them. My first movie I co-wrote with the director, Jiho Lee. And that was that was a one-off. We wrote a couple projects together after that, but that was our only produced project. Lately I've been writing a lot with Ben Rock, who's a friend of mine who worked on the original Playwright project. And he's a director of his own and done movies, and we did a ton of theater together. So like those crime scene and serial killer stories I was telling you, a lot of those shows were directed by Ben. And so Ben and I had a good working aesthetic as director and writer for many years. We co-created a web series together called 20 Seconds to Live that played a ton of festivals and won a bunch of awards. And that was an awesome experience. And that led to us working in audio fiction world. So we did a horror podcast for SHUDDER called Video Palace. And then we just recently released a monster movie for the ears that we did for Audible called Catchers. And Ben and I, with both of those projects, we co-wrote those scripts. They were like 180-page, 3-hour scripts that then Ben went on to direct. And that was the first time I'd done some like true blue co-writing with somebody in a long time. And yeah, I had to relax about certain things because I realized right off the bat that Ben and I are just different writers in certain ways. And just there were certain things that I would write it this way, Ben would write it a different way. And it wasn't like somebody would win the argument. It would be, we got into a process, especially because we were just working quickly, which also helps, is that he would write one episode, I'd write the next episode. Then we would trade episodes and rewrite each other. And I would look at the script and go, oh, Ben rewrote that thing that I like in a way that he would do it, which is different from me, but I trust him because he's a great storyteller and because we're friends and we've been doing. So there's a lot of trust, a lot of letting go of ego, and also a lot of recognizing his gifts. Like I like succinct stuff. Ben loves a rambling monologue, and he would write these rambling monologues for this one character in our last show, and like our producers would just loved it, and I would, my instinct would be to always try to pull it back, and I was like, oh wait a minute, people love this. Like, this is a gift. He has this gift, and I need to stand out of the way and just let him be amazing at, like, and he has other gifts as a writer as well. But it was a learning experience for me, especially, doing this for 25 years or whatever, to be able to stand out of the way and go, okay, I'm going to let Ben be better at me than this, and that was a good lesson. But I keep using the words. There's a lot of humility, a lot of humbleness, a lot of letting go of ego, and
100%.
Some people, that's just not their bag. That's why there's, especially playwriting. I are there any writing teams in playwriting particularly? Because it's so personal.
I would say so. I mean, yeah. You said that's his gift, that's your gift. But early on, when we first started this, you said you had a superpower, and I wanted to go back to it. Now I can't even remember what that superpower was.
It's that, at least in my 10-minute plays, it's being funny and broad and entertaining, but then before you know it, it's heartbreaking, or like you just get hit in the heart muscle. It's like I take the comedy fist, and before you know it, I punched you in the heart with it, and you feel something. And yeah, so that's, and it's like, I like writing comedies where people are having a really good time, their audience is having a good time, and before you know it, you've affected them, and they feel something. They go, oh, like that. At the end of a show is 10 times better than any laugh you can get, and that just took practice. But that's also me. Like I'm that guy who's like, I guess I'm a funny guy, but I'm the guy who kind of hits you in the heart when you're not expecting it. And you go, oh, Bob.
How do you get emotion across to an audience? How do you play their emotions? How do you do that in a short play or even a full length play? What's the trick?
I don't think there's a trick. I think there's just
a superpower.
Either that, or it's just practice and learning how to do it, and learning. It's a lot of it's setup is what it is. It's setup and then payoff. Like that's another. We talked about the basics, setups and payoffs. Like screenwriting is so much setups. Like one of the most successful writers in Hollywood has said that often. It's setups and payoffs. And like
what's a setup and payoff? For an example of one, just so our listeners and myself can learn.
Sorry.
No, this is
that
this comes up a lot in episodes. That there's always one question that I always ask, and because you're not in the midst of writing,
right?
You don't. I'll ask that question. There's always that on the spot question because you're not in the process of writing. That's just like I don't know it. So don't feel bad. It's my gift.
No, it's just. I was trying to think of it in like a very popular movie that everybody's seen, but like,
what I'll do is I'll keep recording after you leave, and so when it pops in your head and you get in the car, you can just call it. We'll keep recording.
I mean, I can use an example from the play I was talking about, Rocket Sex, which was like, I talked about the idea. This is my one published play, and this woman's about to, she's telling this guy that she's trying to hook up with in a porno theater that I'm about to go to sleep for 10 years on a spaceship. So that people don't go insane and kill people on the ship, they're allowed to live one memory and relive it, their favorite memory, for the next 10 years while they sleep. And he's like, oh, that's cool. And like, they're having this sweet, and she's so nervous because she doesn't know really how to have sex in a porno theater with the dude. And he's like, and he eventually just like, just chill. Why don't we just relax and watch this terrible movie together? And there's a really sweet moment of them together. And then she's like, I'm so glad I chose you. And he's like, what are you talking about? It's like, you're my memory. This is my, like, she's been, see, you just did it. You just did it. Oh, it was more of I get it. But you did it. You did that thing that the audience did, but they were like, oh, and I hit them in the heart. Like, and the thing that was a setup and a payoff. And I was setting up, and I kind of did it in such a way where she was talking, you thought she was talking about the future. I have to pick a dream. I have to pick a memory. And it wasn't even like, it just didn't even feel like that was the plot of the show. That was just the thing she was talking about. And then you realize this whole time I've been watching this memory. That's a setup, and the payoff was one of the best of my career. Again, seen by 50 people, but then it got to run in New York, so it got seen by more people. But that's just an example.
How do you learn that?
That's practice. Because that's the thing that when a writer writes something and hands it to somebody for development or for notes, and the person goes, this thing at the end, I don't understand why that's important. And you're like, well, I set it up back here. I'm like, I missed that. And so then hopefully you get that note and you figure out how to do it better. And it's just practice, and it's failing at it. And it's Because if you're setting up something that's going to pay off, set up something on page 10 that's going to pay off on page 100, there's giving too much information. There's giving not enough information. Do you need to do it, 3 times? And then the third time they go, oh, like it's just practice. And it's not really a superpower. It's just I've practiced really hard in it and I've gotten kind of good at it. And I did my only other, what I would consider a full play was All the Best Killers are Librarians, which was a serial killer show. So it made it to the end. They have a playoff at the end of the seasons, and all the shows kind of face off, and the audience chooses a victor. And we won, which was awesome. So we got to finish the play, and I compressed it all into an hour-long play, and we did it at the Hollywood Fringe, and my wife, Jen, produced it, and she starred as one of the evil librarians, and we had all these crazy knife fights and these ridiculous awesome battles, and it was funny and blood-soaked, and there wasn't actually blood, but it was just really violent and funny. It's about a super shy librarian who discovers that she's also a skilled assassin, and she falls in love with the cleanup guy, the guy who comes after her and cleans up all the bodies, and they're having their first kiss, and he's like, "I'm sorry, I have to melt these bodies with acid now." And so it was really funny and broad, and we just had a killer run. I watched that show every week of my life. I love that show so much. But like at the end, it's got a heartbreaking ending where, her guy doesn't make it. And it's done in such a way that, that's sort of a payoff of our villain and the way he works. And every time the audience, I got him every time. And it's just practice. But, we did a run of that show, and then I got to write it as a play, and then I did readings, and I had friends read it, and we rehearsed the hell out of it. It's just work. There's really no secrets. There's only work and figuring out, what works and what doesn't. Anybody who says that there's secrets to writing and storytelling, I don't believe that.
So there's a lot of fight choreography in All the Best Serial Killers Are.
Yeah.
So how does that look? What does that look like on the page? I think most writers would probably have some writers or beginning writers would probably like a step by step, Perry, whatnot. So how do you write it? What do those stage directions look like
for theater? Right?
Yes,
it's different. Yes. It's different for the screen. For theater, it's pretty straightforward. It's like
good old fashioned Shakespeare. They fight.
Yeah, it's like yes, and then and this is actually kind of similar with screenwriting. It's like you only get specific when when something important is happening. So like the big gag of All the Best Killers are Librarians is that there's just a billion knife throws, and our fight choreographer Mike, who's what's the big LA awards?
Ovations?
Yeah, he won an ovation for best fight choreography. I think for She Kills Monsters, the LOFT ensemble.
Oh wow!
And so Mike's the real deal, and he played one of our librarians, but then also he did all of our fight choreography. And there's this trick where an actor, and I write in the script, early, like the first knife throw is like, he turns around and throws a knife at her, and she catches it in her hand. And that's all I wrote. And then Mike taught this trick where our actor, Eric Giancolli, mimes that he has a knife in his hand, turns around and just does a throw. And then our actress, Lauren Van Kuren, is genius. She's holding a knife behind her leg, and she just pulls it up in front of her face, and it looks like she just caught a knife before it hit her in the eyeball. And it sounds so simple, right?
Right.
Audiences went nuts. And so then we did it in the weekly show, and I think somebody commented, they're like, I thought I was going to get tired of them, but you kept figuring out interesting ways to elevate it. And that stuck with me. And I'm like, that person was right. I need to make sure that every time there's a knife throw, it's a little more interesting than the one that came before it. So, and I did that in the show. There's once where like she's faced with 3 people with guns, and our actress just does a mime, and all 3 people put knives in their necks, and they do it so fast and so elegantly. It's just killer. And like once she catches 2 knives and one in her teeth, all on stage, all with just prop knives hidden around. It's the most lo-fi, ridiculously entertaining thing I've ever been involved in. But also, like, I would write stuff on the page that I didn't know how they were going to do it. When I said they throw 3 knives at her and she catches 2 and one in her teeth, I had no idea how they were going to do that. Lauren figured out how to stash a knife and somehow just throw it into her teeth in a way that the audience couldn't see it until she wanted them to. And then it's just sleight of hand. But as a writer, that's also me trusting my team. Like I'm getting to the point where I'm like, I need to get a new Play Exchange account and start getting my plays out there. But like
when I was searching, when I was like looking for bio stuff, I'm like, that's my first place I usually go.
But like, is some theater company and somewhere else going to know how to do these insane knife throws?
But don't you think that's where a lot of playwrights make the mistake of it's not your job to figure it out. Just let it write. Just write it. And that could be as far as the set goes, as far as whatever that trick is. It's not your job to figure it out. Just write it. You don't have to sit there and describe how it is on the stage, because there's a designer for that. There's a director for that. So just let them figure it out.
Yeah, I think as long as you're kind of respecting the limits of the kinds of theaters that you think are going to want to do your show. So like, you can't really write and 1,000 troops race over the hill on horseback unless you want a projection, or unless you want, it's the kind of show where they're going to have little, stick figures racing by. I've seen, lots of shows that do that sort of thing.
Well, see, and that's interesting, because in my head, when you say that, I'm like, okay, well, here's some sound effects. Here's some sound. We're going to do it with sound and suspension of disbelief, and hopefully the actor with wide-eyed, surprise, like, oh no, of what's in front of them in the fourth wall.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. It is one of my favorite things about writing for the stage, is that there are just so many cool techniques, and it's not my job to think of them all. Sometimes I'll write something going, here's how you're going to do this on stage.
Right.
But often I'm just putting it down there. I'm following my muse, and I'm trusting that the director and a cast are going to be game, are going to figure out a way to do it.
How do you force yourself to write?
I'm really lucky. I get to write full time, so it's my job, and I'm disciplined. I keep office hours. I write Monday through Friday. Shame helps a lot. I get into my office after breakfast and don't get a lot done. Do some reading and some journaling, and I'm online. I do some emails, and before I know it, it's lunch. And then I'm one of the weird writers who my best afternoon hours are my best writing hours. I don't know why that is. Just those hours in between lunch and dinner are by then I'm ashamed that I haven't written yet. So then I come out of lunch kind of raring to go, and my lunch to dinner hours are, because then at dinner I like to close the computer. That's my wife or I make dinner. Usually my wife, she's a much better cook than me. And then we just chill out and watch catch up on DVR or whatever. But so for me, it's just about trying to create some sort of consistency, make it feel like a job. But that's me. That's what works for me.
Sure.
Like I used to write my theater on Sundays, because Serial Killers would end on a Saturday night, and if I got voted back, I'd have to turn around a script pretty quickly.
Sure.
So Sundays were my writing time, but also like that was fun time. Like that's fun.
Do you find that since you write best between lunch and dinner, if you just went ahead and said, all right, I'm going to go ahead and write between lunch and dinner, do you find that would become your shame? That would replace the shame time?
Possibly. Yeah. That's why I'm afraid to just say that's what I there's a part of me that's like, oh, if I just got up and worked really fast, and I could take the afternoon and just goof off. And some writers do that. Stephen King does that. Like, he writes until lunch, and then in the afternoon, he just reads and takes walks. And the dude puts out an 800-page novel every year. But, like, he's so consistent. And so, it's a lot of shame involved. But also, deadlines help. I love deadlines. I like to travel. My wife and I try to take trips every few months. So like knowing there's a trip, like we're going to take a summer trip. So like today in my journal, I was like, okay, I'm going to have 10 weeks, and here are the things I want to accomplish in that 10 weeks. And so then I need to, strategize that and make sure that I'm I have to start showing up. Like if I wait 8 weeks and then start doing the thing I'm supposed to do, I'm never going to finish everything. So I know I have to start now. And that just comes from experience of like doing multiple long form projects over the course of many years.
Do you write on those vacations?
No, not at all. I don't know. That's why I go on vacations, so I can disconnect. And some writers are like write every day type people. I am not. I take weekends off. I write on weekends if there's a deadline, like a really crucial deadline, like I'm getting paid for something. Otherwise, I don't. I did NaNoWriMo for the first time a couple years ago, which is National Novel Writing Month. And it's a nonprofit organization, and they just inspire people from all over the world to get together, and over the course of 30 days in November, you write 50,000 words of your book. And it's a thing, and thousands of people do it every year. I know people have done it 8, 9 times in a row. And I'd started writing fiction again. So 2020, I just decided to do it. And I did it. And like I made my 50,000 words. But I tried writing like 7 days in a row. And that 7th day, my brain was just bleh. So like I realized one of the things I learned to like, even if I'm cranking out, like I have to take a day off to let my brain just kind of reset. But that's me. Like, there are other writers, they can write every day. There's other writers that have to be fingers to the keyboard 10 hours in a row to get their pages. I mean, I'm lucky at like 4 hours cranking, 3 or 4 hours. I can get some pages done in that. I can get enough I do that for a month and I've got a script or play.
Well, and again, you said that's you, but that's the great thing, because that might resonate with somebody who might be being too rough on themselves, because there might be like, I'm not writing every day and I should be doing it like this. And then you have somebody like yourself who says, it's 4 hours a day. I take this time off, and I think it kind of gives people a little bit of reflection that they don't have to be so hard on themselves.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of people saying it has to be this way. You have to write every day. You have to do this many hours or this many pages or words. When I say I write 4 hours a day, sometimes I write more if I'm cranking on an idea. Or sometimes I write less, but I'm thinking about it all day. That's the other thing. It's like I'm whatever I'm working on, it's in my head. I never really get to take a break from that. So there's more to writing than just fingers on the keyboard. There's breaking story. There's thinking about stuff. There's reading or watching things that inspire the work or help you research the work that you're doing. So there's so much to it. I think we have this romantic ideal that, some dude smoking and drinking whiskey with his typewriter and hating his life and just cranking it. Like we have this image of the writer that we've learned from movies, and I think it's bullshit. I didn't even ask you if I could curse on this, but
no, of course, yeah.
And I think that was my first one.
That's all right.
Yeah.
I find that sitting there, that the whiskey interferes with me.
Oh yeah, I can't. I never drink out. Like I used to do that. Like when I would do the fast and looses, I would try to like have a drink, like a beer, and I'm like, I don't like alcohol. I love drinking alcohol, just not when I'm writing.
And then you've got people who are drinking absinthe like there was no tomorrow, and they got
yeah.
What are you working on right now, or what's next?
What's next? Let's see. Well, Ben and I technically have a first look deal at Audible for audio dramas. So we are developing a new idea that we're super excited about. So we're breaking story on that. And then I have a movie in production, so I really need to be writing my next screenplay. So I'm kicking around new ideas for that. And I'm in a short story class. So I'm writing short fiction. Theater, I'm taking a break from. Like, I didn't write a lot over the pandemic for the stage because my primary reason to write theater was taken away, that sort of immediacy. Yeah. So getting gifted back on stage was a real inspiration, and just seeing that amazing team at LOFT and seeing my wife get to direct her first show, like co-direct her first big show and like That's knock awesome. It out of the park was really cool. So I don't know what my next play is, but I think that there'll be more.
Hope so.
Yeah.
And because we didn't touch on it, I just want to squeeze in one little more piece about the radio dramas.
Yeah.
So how is that working without having that visual medium, and how do you do that what's that look like on the page as far as like an audio drama goes?
It's funny because there's not really a standard for what it looks like on the page. You get to kind of create it yourself. So like Ben and I just write it in screenplay format. And you just, in the description, it's just only stuff that you can hear. And so, an opening scene of a show we just did. You know, a cop gets out of a car and stumbles across a monster in the woods and gets eaten. So, and he's talking over the radio with dispatch, and so we're having their audio back and forth. We're hearing her through his radio. You know, we hear his feet crunch on the leaves in the woods. We hear him pull the gun out. I can hear those things, but I can't write the things that we can't hear. So I have to just be very specific with the description. And audio's rad especially because Ben and I have done so much theater together. Like, it's weird. Like, audio dramas are like theater meets TV. Mm-hmm. So it's got that sort of episodic feeling of television, but it's also got that let's put on a show energy of theater. So like our first show, we literally had all the actors mic'd in a room together, and Ben would just block them like a film or a theater scene, and they would just, scripts in hand, they would just go through the scene 3 times. So like we were doing the most dramatic scenes, 15 minutes done, no hair, no makeup, no coverage. And like on a film set, you're doing, if you're lucky, 8 or 10 pages a day. We were cranking out 40 pages a day.
Wow.
And it felt like theater. It felt like punk rock theater with just, and then you have an audio show and it lives forever. So there's a lot of similarities between those two. I think Gifted would make an amazing audio drama, and I've pitched it to Audible, and I'm waiting to hear back. So we'll see.
Are you finding there's a market for this, for audio dramas?
There is, yeah. Well, there's been the podcast explosion, and then there's been a lot of really very, very good narrative fiction podcasts, and some, like, the big podcast to TV or movie successes have been more in like true crime. Mm-hmm. And so those are the ones that everybody talks about. But, you know, Homecoming was a narrative one that became a TV show, but not many others. But I think Hollywood is looking to them as potential IP, intellectual property. So I think there's a lot of hope for that. There hasn't been sort of that, the tipping point of that narrative podcast that everybody in America needs to listen to, like Serial was for true crime. So I hope that Ben and I create that show. We're trying to. We'll see. But yeah, I think it's there's definitely a lot of potential in that world, and it honestly, it scratches that theater itch. Get together with your friends and just make something. Work awesome. Fast.
Where can people find your work?
That's a good question. As far as my work, you can find, my movies and my TV show are available on streaming platforms. And then you can find me. Easiest way to find me is on Twitter. As long as Twitter doesn't implode and become even more awful, I'm at them Bob. Them is my improv troupe. And so this is based off my first email address I had 20 years ago. Anyways, THEM as in Mary, BOB, at them Bob on Twitter, and I'm at Bob DeRosa Writer on Instagram, which has become I'm back on Instagram making a thing of it, so you can always find me there. And I love talking shop, so any writers want to just talk, shoot the shit about writing, you can always reach out to me at those 2 spots, and I'd be happy to chat.
And hopefully they can find your stuff on New Play Exchange. I
will start up a New Play Exchange very soon, James, and I will let you know when it's done, because I like a deadline. So
I think you should. That your work should be out there available for people to produce and direct. So thank you for coming on this Playwright Spotlight.
This has been great. Thanks, James.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Again, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share this channel with your friends. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. And in the meantime, and until we see each other again, keep writing.